While those papers are going around, I'm going to start us with a word of prayer. Gracious Father, thank you for the Lord's Day and the blessings of it. Please bless all of the classes as they are gathering in different parts of the building. Bless our children, bless the teachers and helpers, and bless us in this class as well, that our hearts would be encouraged, that our faith would be strengthened, and that we would be formed more and more in the likeness of your Son as your people to bring you glory and honor in this world. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, I'm going to give you a little bit of an introduction to Chesterton's work on marriage and family today before we begin Drift from Domesticity. This essay's been in the online folder for a little over a week. I told you last week it was there, so some of you will have read it in advance. Some of you may have read it before. If you haven't, that's all right. There's no homework in this class. You can just show up every week and hopefully profit from it. Chesterton wrote voluminously on the family. Several years ago, a collection of some of his writings on the subject appeared under the title Brave New Family. That volume is out of print, but you can still sometimes find copies online. If you want to collect Chesterton's work, I highly recommend that you try and get a copy of that. It is well worth having. We could devote an entire quarter just to studying some of what Chesterton had to say on this topic of marriage and family. But since this series is really just an introduction to Chesterton as a whole, we're only going to devote a small part of our time. We'll probably have 2 or 3 weeks on this particular theme. Chesterton had a traditional Christian view of marriage and family. He argued for fidelity in marriage, loving discipline in child rearing, and moral order within the home. In the course of his cultural analysis, Chesterton often found opportunities to trace society's problems back to the corruption of the family. One of his works that he published was called What's Wrong with the World, and there is a considerable section of that book that's devoted to the corruption of the family and issues arising from that. In that volume, What's Wrong with the World, Chesterton observed the following, quote, "The family is a necessity for mankind. It is, if you like to put it so, a trap for mankind. Only by the hypocritical ignoring of a huge fact can anyone contrive to talk of free love, as if love were an episode like lighting a cigarette or whistling a tune. Suppose whenever a man lit a cigarette, a towering genie arose from the rings of smoke and followed him everywhere as a huge slave. Suppose whenever a man whistled a tune, he drew an angel down and had to walk about forever with a seraph on a string. These catastrophic images are but faint parallels to the earthquake consequences that nature has attached to sex. And it is perfectly plain at the beginning that a man cannot be a free lover. He is either a traitor or a tied man. The second element that creates the family is that its consequences, though colossal, are gradual. The cigarette produces a baby giant. The song only an infant seraph. Thence arises the necessity for some prolonged system of cooperation, and thence arises the family in its full educational sense." End quote. Now that's not from the essay that you've got in front of you. That's from What's Wrong with the World, okay? But that gives you a sense of how Chesterton understands why this topic is so important. You can scarcely overestimate the significance of the family. And you must understand that there is no such thing as free sex. It's never happened in the history of the world. No such thing as free sex. You're either a traitor or you're tied by it. One of the two, inevitably. He goes on in the next paragraph of that work to explain why the family is in most ways uncontrollable by the state. Listen to what he says, quote, "It may be said that this institution of the home is the one anarchist institution. That is to say, it is older than law and stands outside the state. This is not to be understood as meaning that the state has no authority over families. That state authority is invoked and ought to be invoked in many abnormal cases. But in most normal cases of family joys and sorrows, the state has no mode of entry. It is not so much that the law should not interfere as that the law cannot. Just as there are fields too far off for law, so there are fields too near, as a man may see the North Pole before he sees his own backbone. Do you understand the point that he's making? The North Pole is so far away, but you can see the North Pole before you can ever see your own backbone. And the reason is the backbone is too close to you. It's too close to you. It's behind your head. It's right there, and you can't see it. But you could see the North Pole. It's not that the family is in no way, shape, or form connected to the state, but it's too near to properly be under the state. Small and near matters escape control at least as much as vast and remote ones, and the real pains and pleasures of the family form a strong instance of this. Creatures so close to each other as husband and wife, or a mother and children, have powers of making each other happy or miserable with which no public coercion can deal. The child must depend on the most imperfect mother. The mother must be devoted to the most unworthy child. In such relations, legal revenges are vain. Even in the abnormal cases where the law may operate, this difficulty is constantly found, as many a bewildered magistrate knows. He has to save children from starvation by taking away their breadwinner. So he's talking about when the state intervenes, a father is starving his children, they're malnourished, they're not being cared for. What does the state do? He takes him away from the very person that's responsible for feeding him. He often has to break a wife's heart because her husband has already broken her head. The state has no tool delicate enough to deracinate the rooted habits and tangled affections of the family. The two sexes, whether happy or unhappy, are glued together too tightly for us to get the blade of a legal penknife in between them. The man and the woman are one flesh. Yes, even when they are not one spirit. Man is a quadruped. Upon this ancient and anarchic intimacy, types of government have little or no effect. It is happy or unhappy by its own sexual wholesomeness and genial habit under the Republic of Switzerland or the despotism of Siam. Even a republic in Siam would not have done much toward freeing the Siamese twins. Do you understand what he's saying? Doesn't matter what kind of government you've got. Doesn't matter what kind of arrangement the state may have. The state is largely powerless to truly affect positive change and rule in the family, because the family is organic. Speaking at the end of the same section in What's Wrong with the World, and against the growing frequency of divorce, Chesterton explains what is necessary to enjoy marriage and why all marriages are incompatible. Listen to what he says. Quote, "The principle is this, that in everything worth having, even in every pleasure, there is a point of pain or tedium that must be survived so that the pleasure may revive and endure. The joy of battle comes after the first fear of death. The joy of reading Virgil comes after the bore of learning him. The glow of the sea bather comes after the icy shock of the sea bath. And the success of the marriage comes after the failure of the honeymoon." He's saying you cannot have a happy marriage until you have persevered beyond pain and tedium. All human vows, laws, and contracts are so many ways of surviving with success this breaking point, this instant of potential surrender. In everything on this earth that is worth doing, there is a stage when no one would do it except for necessity or honor. It is then that the institution upholds a man and helps him on to the firmer ground ahead. Whether this solid fact of human nature is sufficient to justify the sublime dedication of Christian marriage is quite another matter. It is amply sufficient to justify the general human feeling of marriage as a fixed thing, dissolution of which is a fault, or at least an ignominy. The essential element is not so much duration as security. Two people must be tied together in order to do themselves justice, for 20 minutes at a dance or for 20 years in a marriage. In both cases, the point is that if a man is bored in the first 5 minutes, he must go on and force himself to be happy. Coercion is a kind of encouragement, and anarchy, or what some call liberty, is essentially oppressive because it is essentially discouraging. If we all floated in the air like bubbles, free to drift anywhere at any instant, the practical result would be that no one would have the courage to begin a conversation. It would be so embarrassing to start a sentence in a friendly whisper and then to have to shout the last half of it because the other party was floating away into the free and formless ether. The two must hold each other to do justice to each other. If Americans can be divorced for incompatibility of temper, I cannot conceive why they are not all divorced. I have known many happy marriages, but never a compatible one. The whole aim of marriage is to fight through and survive the instant when incompatibility becomes unquestionable. For a man and a woman as such are incompatible. Now, that's a long paragraph, but that one paragraph will change your marriage if you will let it. A man and a woman cannot be other than incompatible. One of you is a dude, one of you is a lady. By definition, you're incompatible. Chesterton says, I've never known a compatible marriage. I've known many happy marriages. And the only way to get to a happy marriage is to realize that you are incompatible and to persevere. It's the only way. One final quote, this one from Heretics, another book that he wrote, 1905. But it gives you a sense, and I think this is important as you begin to read this essay that we're going to look at. It gives you a sense of how Chesterton views marriage and family, but also life. Okay? It says this, quote, "The supreme adventure is not falling in love. The supreme adventure is being born. There we do walk suddenly into a splendid and startling trap. There we do see something of which we have not dreamed before. Our father and mother do lie in wait for us and leap out on us like brigands from a bush. Our uncle is a surprise. Our aunt is, in the beautiful common expression, a bolt from the blue. When we step into the family by the act of being born, we do step into a world which is incalculable, into a world which has its own strange laws, into a world which could do without us, into a world that we have not made. In other words, when we step into the family, we step into a fairy tale. That sums up how Chesterton sees everything. He sees magic everywhere. He knows that we live in a magical world, not in a closed mechanical universe, and that forms and informs how he sees even marriage and family. Okay? So, today we're going to read The Drift from Domesticity. This was published in The Thing. It came out in 1929. And again, I'm going to try to get through as much of it as possibly can, but I've interspersed it with some quotes from other parts of his work. In the matter of reforming things, as distinct from deforming them, there is one plain and simple principle, a principle which will probably be called a paradox. There exists in such a case a certain institution or law, let us say for the sake of simplicity, a fence or gate erected across a road. The more modern type of reformer goes gaily up to it and says, I don't see the use of this, let us clear it away. To which the more intelligent type of reformer will do well to answer, if you don't see the use of it, I certainly won't let you clear it away. Go away and think. Then, when you can come back and tell me that you do see the use of it, I may allow you to destroy it. This paradox rests on the most elementary common sense. The gate or fence did not grow there. It was not set up by somnambulists who built it in their sleep. It is highly improbable that it was put there by escaped lunatics who were for some reason loose in the street. Some person had some reason for thinking it would be a good thing for somebody. And until we know what the reason was, we really cannot judge whether the reason was reasonable. It is extremely probable that we have overlooked some whole aspect of the question. If something set up by human beings like ourselves seems to be entirely meaningless and mysterious. There are reformers who get over this difficulty by assuming that all their fathers were fools. But if that be so, we can only say that folly appears to be a hereditary disease. But the truth is that nobody has any business to destroy a social institution until he has really seen it as an historical institution. If he knows how it arose and what purposes it was supposed to serve, he may really be able to say that they were bad purposes, or that they have since become bad purposes, or that they are purposes which are no longer served. But if he simply stares at the thing as a senseless monstrosity that has somehow sprung up in his path, it is he, and not the traditionalist, who is suffering from an illusion. We might even say that he is seeing things in a nightmare. This principle applies to 1,000 things, to trifles as well as true institutions, to convention as well as to conviction. It was exactly the sort of person like Joan of Arc who did know why women wore skirts, who was most justified in not wearing one. It was exactly the sort of person like St. Francis who did sympathize with the feast and the fireside, who was most entitled to become a beggar on the open road. And when, in the general emancipation of modern society, the Duchess says she does not see why she shouldn't play leapfrog, or the dean declares that he sees no valid canonical reason why he should not stand on his head, we may say to these persons with patient benevolence, defer therefore the operation you contemplate until you have realized by ripe reflection what principle or prejudice you are violating. Then play leapfrog and stand on your head, and the Lord be with you. Now, he starts out immediately with an observation about Reformation. Chesterton enters the Roman Catholic Church in 1922. This work comes out 7 years later. I'm going to give you a quote in just a minute where he's going to apply this same principle, because he mentions it in a number of places in his writings. He's going to apply this same principle to the Protestant Reformation, and I, as a Protestant, convictionally, is going to say yes and amen, and that's why I remain a Protestant. So just prepare yourself, right? Chesterton's going to apply it in defense of his Roman Catholicism in another essay. And I'm going to say it's a misapplication of a true principle. You have no business monkeying around with things that you don't understand. You have no business setting out to reform and restructure the world when you don't understand why the world is structured in the way that it is. There are all kinds of things in this world that are bad, that are set up wrong, that need to be burned to the ground and rebuilt from scratch. But you are not qualified to do that until you understand how it got there, how it came to be that way. We have a host of people on social media who imagine themselves very qualified to say what is wrong with the world and how they are going to fix it. And most of them are very proud of their ignorance. that they have not done the reading, that they do not understand how things came to be this way, but they are sure that they can fix it. I will tell you, they're going to make matters 100-fold worse. Chesterton is exactly right. Until you know why the fence is there, you must not tear it down. Once you know why it is there, then you can say, that reason does not apply anymore. That fence doesn't need to be there any longer. It is perfectly appropriate to tear down fences once you understand why the fence was put up to begin with. And not until. Not until. If we can critique our own Protestant tradition, we might say that although not the Protestant reformers in the first and second generation of the movement, certainly many of their great-great-grandchildren have disregarded this principle to the destruction of much of the modern evangelical church that has become a clown show because nobody understood why the church ever did the silly things that it did. That is foolishness. And if your operating assumption is that all of the boomers or whoever came before you were a bunch of fools, then as Chesterton says, we can only say their folly is hereditary, and they've passed it on to you. You must not approach Reformation with that kind of hubris. You must not walk into a situation that you do not understand and say, this makes no sense to me, therefore tear it down. The fact that it doesn't make sense to you is proof positive that you are not the person to tear it down if it needs to be torn down at all. Responsible reformation must proceed from an intelligent understanding of history and tradition. Only then can tradition be modified. Does that make sense? Chesterton speaks to this, as I said, in many places. The elders told me I couldn't teach orthodoxy. They didn't say I couldn't offer you quotes from it. I won't tell if you don't. This is in the chapter called The Ethics in Elfland. Ethics in Elfland, which is where you live. Listen to what he says, quote, "There is one thing that I have never from my youth up been able to understand. I have never been able to understand where people got the idea that democracy was in some way opposed to tradition. It is obvious that tradition is only democracy extended through time. It is trusting to a consensus of common human voices rather than to some isolated or arbitrary record. The man who quotes some German historian against the tradition of the Catholic Church, for instance, is strictly appealing to aristocracy. He is appealing to the superiority of one expert against the awful authority of a mob. It is quite easy to see why a legend is treated, and ought to be treated, more respectfully than a book of history. The legend is generally made by the majority of people in the village who are sane. The book is generally written by the one man in the village who is mad. Those who urge against tradition that men in the past were ignorant may go and urge it at the Carlton Club, along with the statement that voters in the slums are ignorant. It will not do for us. If we attach great importance to the opinion of ordinary men in great unanimity when we are dealing with daily matters, there is no reason why we should disregard it when we are dealing with history or fable. Tradition may be defined as an extension of the franchise. Tradition means giving votes to the most obscure of all classes, our ancestors. It is the democracy of the dead. Tradition refuses to submit to the small and arrogant oligarchy of those who merely happen to be walking about. All Democrats, he's not talking about your modern Democratic Party, he's talking about people committed to this idea of democracy. All Democrats object to men being disqualified by the accident of birth. Tradition objects to their being disqualified by the accident of death. Democracy tells us not to neglect a good man's opinion, even if he is our groom. Tradition asks us not to neglect a good man's opinion, even if he is our father. I, at any rate, cannot separate the two ideas of democracy and tradition. It seems evident to me that they are the same idea. We will have the dead at our councils. The ancient Greeks voted by stones. These shall vote by tombstones. It is all quite regular and official, for most tombstones, like most ballot papers, are marked with a cross. What do you put on the ballot? An X. What do you put on the tombstone? An X. A cross. Now, do you understand what Chesterton's saying? Tradition is the voice of our fathers. It's the democracy of the dead. It's recognizing that no one generation has cornered the market on wisdom. And people walking around who say that they love democracy, but are actually socialists. They love free speech, but not speech that's contrary to their own. They reject tradition. They are doing the most undemocratic thing imaginable. They are aristocrats. They are oligarchs. They believe that only those that are living and breathing right now should have any say. Now, if you caught it, there was that oblique slap at the Protestant tradition when he talks about a German historian speaking against the tradition of the Catholic Church. He's appealing to aristocracy. Now, you say, well, as a Protestant, of course, I think Chesterton's out to lunch. Actually, as a Protestant, I think Chesterton's spot on. And if the Protestant Reformation is simply Luther's voice of objection against the tradition of the church, saying, I want to remake the church in my own image, then we all should repent of being Protestant and return to Rome. As it turns out, that's not what the Protestant tradition is about at all. Luther and all of the Protestant reformers in the first and second generation were appealing to the antiquity of the Christian tradition. If you read Calvin's Institutes, you read almost as many references to the church fathers as you do the scriptures. And it's not because the church fathers have authority on par with the scriptures. Clearly they don't. But Luther and Calvin and other reformers are saying, we are not making something up. We are not reading the Bible in a new way. This is how the church has always read the scriptures. If you read the canons of the Council of Orange from 529, a millennia before Luther, you will think that it was written by a Calvinistic church council in the 16th century. It's shockingly Calvinistic. But it's from the 500s, not from the 1500s. And so as Protestants, we should be people who are deeply committed to this principle. That say, look, we are not acting like we are the first people to ever read the Bible, and we are not suggesting that we can read the Bible better than 2,000 years of our predecessors. We are seeking to read the Bible in agreement with the broader Christian tradition, which means we're not going to say prayers to Mary. We're not going to bow to the authority of the Pope. We are not going to believe that by our good works we can deliver our souls from a long stay in purgatory, because that would be stupid and unbiblical, and it's not what the church believes. We come back to our essay here. Among the traditions that are being thus attacked, not intelligently, but most unintelligently, is the fundamental human creation called the household, or the home. That is a typical thing which men attack, not because they can see through it, but because they cannot see it at all. They beat at it blindly, in a fashion entirely haphazard and opportunist. And many of them would pull it down without even pausing to ask why it was ever put up. It is true that only a few of them would have avowed this object in so many words. That only proves how very blind and blundering they are. But they have fallen into a habit of mere drift and gradual detachment from family life, something that is often merely accidental and devoid of any definite theory at all. But though it is accidental, it is nonetheless anarchical. What is he saying? He's saying it's contrary to the law. It's outside of the law. You can't... Well, let's say that the Supreme Court says that two sodomites can get married in the same way that my wife and I are married. Chesterton's saying that's not the way that it works. You haven't changed the definition of marriage. You're just making things up. Marriage is not subject to your silly idea of law. He goes on, and it is all the more anarchical for not being anarchist. It's not lawless, it's above the law. It's above the law. It seems to be largely founded on individual irritation, an irritation which varies with the individual. We are merely told that in this or that case, a particular temperament was tormented by a particular environment, but nobody even explained how the evil arose, let alone whether the evil is really escaped. We are told that in this or that family, Grandmama talked a great deal of nonsense, which God knows is true. Or that it is very difficult to have intimate intellectual relations with Uncle Gregory without telling him he is a fool, which is indeed the case. But nobody seriously considers the remedy, or even the malady, or whether the existing individualistic dissolution is a remedy at all. Much of this business began with the influence of Ibsen, a very powerful dramatist and an exceedingly feeble philosopher. I suppose that Nora, of the Doll's House, was intended to be an inconsequent person, but certainly her most inconsequent action was her last. She complained that she was not yet fit to look after children, and then proceeded to get as far as possible from the children that she might study them more closely. Now, if you're not familiar with what he said, I told you last week, this is one of the reasons Chesterton's work is more difficult than Lewis, for example. He makes so many contemporary references, and if you're not familiar with Ibsen's play, Doll House, then this is not going to make any sense to you. So let me give you an idea here, right? At the end of the 1800s, late in the 19th century, there was a dramatist, a screenwriter, right, a stage, a playwright, who wrote this play, The Doll House, right, or A Doll House, given a couple different titles in different productions. And it centers on this woman, a wife, a mother, who is taken for granted, so she thinks, by her husband. There's all kinds of drama associated with this. Different characters come in the scene. She's got a friend, and there's another family friend, and there's a character that's dying. Anyway, she is an inconsequential person. Her life is insignificant. Hey, did you ever, I'm going to date myself here, right, as a child of the 80s, but did you ever listen to Reba McEntire's music back in the day? Is there life out there? So much she hasn't done. Is there place beyond her family and her home? Okay, that was a 1980s country song that's basically Ibsen's play. So at the end of the play, Nora leaves. She abandons her husband. She abandons her children. They actually had to change the production several times when they produced it because people said the ending is so dark that modern audiences would not accept it. And so you'll see different endings depending on which production of it you watch. But she abandons her husband and her family in order to go and learn herself. This is the end of the 1800s, right? This is the 19th century. This is a significant play for the advancement of feminism, right? And Ibsen said he was not actually trying to necessarily produce a feminist drama, but that's exactly what he did. And Chesterton says the people who are advocating this don't understand the issue, they don't understand the problem, and they are propounding a solution that is not a solution to anything. So Nora, in order to understand herself, abandons who she is. She's a wife and a mom. Because she thinks she's an inconsequential person. But as it turns out, the most inconsequential thing she ever did was to abandon her family. I need to get away from my children to learn who I am. You're only going to learn who you are in relation to your children, in relation to your husband, in relation to the calling that God has given you. And there you're going to realize your life is not inconsequential, it's incredibly significant. Chesterton is saying they don't understand what they are trying to fix. There have been several points in my life where I have been frustrated that in God's providence, He took certain people off the playing board before certain events, right? I am exceedingly frustrated that, that Chesterton did not get to write about the Obergefell decision, right? Very frustrated by that, right? If any of you have ever read the work of Neil Postman, who was not a Christian, by the way, he's a secular philosopher of technology and various other things, but he died in 2006 right before the real appearance of Facebook. And I have never forgiven him for it. I'm angry with Neil Postman that he did not stick around long enough to talk to us about social media. But the reality is, it's because Postman talked to us about social media in multiple works. Amusing Ourselves to Death and Technopoly are two that you definitely should read at some point. Chesterton is writing about things that we are living in the middle of right now. Feminism has destroyed the family. And Chesterton is one of the earliest and most articulate voices against it. Right? We go on. There is one... Is it almost... okay. Yeah, all right, I've got a few minutes. There is one simple test and type of this neglect of scientific thinking and the sense of a social rule, the neglect which has now left us with nothing but a welter of exceptions. I have read hundreds and thousands of times in all the novels and newspapers of our epoch certain phrases about the just right of the young to liberty, about the unjust claim of the elders to control, about the conception that all souls must be free or all citizens equal, about the absurdity of authority or the degradation of obedience. I am not arguing those matters directly at the moment, but what strikes me as astounding in a logical sense is that not one of these myriad novelists and newspapermen ever seems to think of asking the next and most obvious question. It never seems to occur to them to inquire what becomes of the opposite obligation. If the child is free from the first to disregard the parent, why is not the parent free from the first to disregard the child? If Mr. Jones Sr. and Mr. Jones Jr. are only two free and equal citizens, why should one citizen sponge on another citizen for the first 15 years of his life? Why should the elder Mr. Jones be expected to feed, clothe, and shelter out of his own pocket another person who is entirely free of any obligations to him? If the bright young thing cannot be asked to tolerate her grandmother, who has become something of a bore, why should the grandmother or the mother have tolerated the bright young thing at a period of her life when she was by no means bright? Why did they laboriously look after her at a time when her contributions to the conversation were seldom epigrammatic and not often intelligible? Why should Jones Sr. stand drinks and free meals to anybody so unpleasant as Jones Jr., especially in the immature phases of his existence? Why should he not throw the baby out of the window, or at any rate, kick the boy out of doors? It is obvious that we are dealing with a real relation, which may be equality, but is certainly not similarity. Again, like you read Chesterton, you would think that you were reading a contemporary commentator on our present state of stupidity. But he's writing 100 years ago. In another work that Chesterton published some years before this essay in 1920, it's called The Superstition of Divorce. He says this, quote, "This triangle of truisms of father, mother, and child cannot be destroyed. It can only destroy those civilizations which disregard it. Most modern reformers are merely bottomless skeptics and have no basis on which to rebuild. And it is well that such reformers should realize that there is something they cannot reform. You can put down the mighty from their seat. You can turn the world upside down. And there is much to be said for the view that it may then be the right way up. But you cannot create a world in which the baby carries the mother. You cannot create a world in which the mother has not authority over the baby. You can waste your time in trying by giving votes to babies or proclaiming a republic of infants in arms. You can say, as an educationist said the other day, that small children should, quote, criticize, question authority, and suspend their judgment. I do not know why he did not go on to say that they should earn their own living, pay income tax to the state, and die in battle for the fatherland. For the proposal evidently is that children shall have no childhood. But you can, if you find entertainment in such games, organize representative government among little boys and girls and tell them to take their legal and constitutional responsibilities as seriously as possible. In short, you can be crazy, but you cannot be consistent. You cannot really carry your own principle back to the Aboriginal group and really apply it to the mother and the baby. You will not act on your own theory in the simplest and most practical of all possible cases. You are not quite so mad as that. What's Chesterton saying? He's saying this is a self-defeating, illogical, destructive ideology that disregards the inescapable reality and the invincibility of the Christian family. You can say that two sodomites are married. You cannot change what marriage is. You can say that children should be liberated from their parents. You cannot change the reality that no child can actually be liberated from their parents and survive. You cannot destroy the family. You can only be destroyed by it if you disregard it. I know we're right at time. I'm going to give you one more paragraph, and then we'll stop there. Some social reformers try to evade this difficulty, I know, by some vague notions about the state or an abstraction called education, eliminating the parental function. By the way, Chesterton wrote a lot about education, and we will cover some of that in this class. But this, like many notions of solid scientific persons, is a wild illusion of the nature of mere moonshine. It is based on that strange new superstition, the idea of infinite resources of organization. It is as if officials grew like grass or bred like rabbits. There is supposed to be an endless supply of salaried persons and of salaries for them, and they are to undertake all that human beings naturally do for themselves, including the care of children. He is talking about the rise of government totalitarianism, in case you're not following. But men cannot live by taking in each other's baby linen. They cannot provide a tutor for each citizen. Who is to tutor the tutors? Men cannot be educated by machinery. And though there might be a robot bricklayer or scavenger, there will never be a robot schoolmaster or governess. Let me pause. I know some of you are going to say, but AI. Thank you, you just made Chesterton's point. The actual effect of this theory is that one harassed person has to look after 100 children instead of one normal person looking after a normal number of them. Normally, that normal person is urged by a natural force, which costs nothing and does not require a salary. The force of natural affection for his young, which exists even among the animals. If you cut off that natural force and substitute a paid bureaucracy, you are like a fool who should pay men to turn the wheel of his mill because he refused to use wind or water which he could get for nothing. You are like a lunatic who should carefully water his garden with a watering can while holding up an umbrella to keep off the rain. In The Superstition of Divorce, Chesterton makes a complimentary point. I'll leave you with this. Quote, if people cannot mind their own business, it cannot possibly be more economical to pay them to mind each other's business, and still less to mind each other's babies. It is simply throwing away a natural force and then paying for an artificial force, as if a man were to water a plant with a hose while holding up an umbrella to protect it from the rain. The whole really rests on a plutocratic illusion of an infinite supply of servants. When we offer any other system as a career for women, we are really proposing that an infinite number of them should become servants of a plutocratic or bureaucratic sort. Ultimately, we are arguing that a woman should not be a mother to her own baby, but a nursemaid to someone else's baby. But it will not work, even on paper. We cannot all live by taking in each other's washing, especially in the form of pinafores. In the last resort, the only people who either can or will give individual care to each of the individual children are their individual parents, end quote. Now that sets up the next major section of the essay that we'll come to next week. But understand what he's saying. He's not denying that sometimes there's a single mom who is going to need a babysitter or a daycare. There are sometimes situations in which a family is going to need help and support from other members of the community. He's saying you cannot deconstruct the family and treat the members of the family as if they are all atomistic, disconnected, free individuals. To do so is to destroy society. You cannot do it. And in the name of liberating women from the tyranny of the home, you have made them slaves in the workforce where they have no dignity, no authority, and no fulfillment. And Chesterton is saying this 100 years ago. And Western civilization, and America specifically, would have been wise to have paid attention because we would not be where we are today. Okay? All right. You can put a pin there in the essay. We will come back to it, Lord willing, next week. And I hope that you are enjoying Chesterton. I hope you're being edified. The parts that may be difficult for you to read, if you're having difficulty following, that's okay. Reread him. Keep reading. Come talk to me. I'll be happy to try and help you with any of the hard parts. You can understand Chesterton, and when you understand him, you will delight in him. I really believe that. I don't believe it's possible to understand Chesterton and not be delighted in him. Okay?